Those of you who live in the D.C., anywhere in the D.C. area, or if you read National Geographic or the Washington Post online, you know Joel Achenbach. He writes on science and politics for the Washington Post's national desk. He's been a staff writer there for 26 years. Very good. He started the newsroom's first online column called Rough Draft, which I think I actually remember. It no longer exists, and started the Achenblog about 11 years ago. He's been a regular contributor to National Geographic for something like 20 years and has written on such topics as dinosaurs, particle physics, earthquakes, extraterrestrial life, future astrophysics missions, right, exactly, megafauna extinction, and the electrical grid. I mean, there is no science or technology topic that Joel cannot write extensively and very readably about. And we are having a conversation with author Andy Weir. He's first hired as a programmer for it's listed in your online bio for a national laboratory.
Yeah.
A national laboratory, okay.
That's correct.
At age 15 and has been working as a software engineer ever since, probably doing more than just being a software engineer ever since.
Yeah, for the past year I've been concentrating on writing.
He is also a lifelong space nerd, so unique in this audience, and a devoted hobbyist of subjects like relativistic physics, orbital mechanics, and the history of man's spaceflight. And because although I've known Joel for 2 decades or something like that, I do not know Andy. So I looked up. You've got a bunch of sites or a bunch of things written about you, and not a joke, Andy. One of the sites that is Weir. .com, I think, AndyWeir.com. It notes that you recently, this is not a joke, you recently wrote a book, The Martian, soon to be a major motion picture.
Soon.
So how did that turn out?
But, I don't know. You know, it's still in the future, apparently.
Maybe you can fill us in.
We're going to see.
Ask him what the plans are for this Martian
We'll see how it goes.
Okay, so Andy and Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So Andy Weir, like, wow. You know, I mean, you're my hero. This is an unbelievable story. Tell us.
You need like higher standards.
Yeah. So I mean, it is. This is for real. An unbelievable story of publishing. Tell us. I mean, you started writing it on a napkin or something, right? and worked your way up to some emails and then a blog or something, and then it was online, and then it just grew. Tell us a little bit about when you realized you had something huge.
Well, yeah, so I always wanted to be a writer, but I also like eating regular meals. And so I decided I'd be a computer programmer instead. Right. But I always loved to write, and so that I was always doing that as a hobby. Around 1999, I want to say, I was working for America Online. Hi, I'm old. And I got laid off along with 800 other people when they merged with Netscape. Hi, I'm old. And so they said, oh, by the way, yeah, you're laid off, here's some severance pay, and you have 60 days to sell your stock options or they'll fizzle. And I'm like, well, I guess I had to look at my stock options, which I'd never done before. And this huge pile of money worth of stock options that I wasn't even aware of. So I sold them, and I'm like, hey, I can spend a few years without having to work. This is my chance to take my shot at writing. So I took 3 years off. I spent 3 years writing a book. That book was not The Martian. You've never heard of it.
Does that book exist somewhere?
Yeah, it's out there online. It's called Theft of Pride, but it's just not that good. And so it didn't get published. It's a standard tale of woe that you'll hear from most authors that couldn't get an agent, couldn't get any interest from anybody. And then I said, like,
but you didn't get discouraged.
I did get discouraged, yeah.
Okay, you got discouraged. Okay.
I pretty much gave up on it at that point. I was like, well, now I don't need to wonder what might have been, right? I don't need to wonder what if. I did actually take my shot. Right. Now back into computer programming. And that wasn't like a hang your head Charlie Brown sad music situation. I like programming computers. I'm good at it, and it's fun. I enjoy it, and I like the environment and stuff. But I still like writing, so when this newfangled World Wide Web came up, I decided, oh, okay, I can write stories and I can just post them online, and I can skip out all the middlemen, and I can just do it as a labor of love. So I did that, And over 10 years, I slowly built up an audience just by writing short stories, web comics, that sort of thing. I'm a terrible artist, by the way, but it didn't keep me from making comics.
So you had a fan base already.
Yeah.
And was that critical to sort of launching The Martian?
I really think it was. I really think it was, because when I started working on The Martian, it was around 2009, and by then I'd built up around 3,000 regular readers. And I was working on 2 other serials at the time also on my website. One of them was The Martian. One of them was the story of like aliens invading Earth, and the last one was about a 19th century mermaid. So an eclectic group of stories on my website, and I would just kind of write work on whichever one I felt the whim to work on. But I noticed I was getting all the feedback on The Martian. Everybody liked The Martian.
Now, why do they like The Martian so much?
I think it's, you know, if I could have a definitive answer to that question, I'd be a lot more comfortable now working on my next book. As it is, I still don't really know what I did right. I think it is that that I guess people just really like Mark Watney. They like the main character a lot. They really empathized with him, and feel I kind of bungled into accidentally making a very likable main character.
So he was super likable, but also he was a problem solver, and
Yeah.
that is sort of his chief characteristic. Is he didn't hang his head and mope. He said, "Okay, you know, I'm going to solve this problem." And is that something that you think you'll return to, that kind of character?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have a writing style of a sort, I guess, that I've got a voice that I like, and I'm going to stick with it. My next book is also told in the first-person smartass narrative style, and I don't like. So no one would ever accuse The Martian of being literature, right? It doesn't have any deeper meaning. It doesn't have any symbolism. The main character is exactly the same at the end of the story as he is at the beginning. He doesn't undergo any change of personality or ideology or thought. He doesn't mature in any way.
So
this
are
is
you
not literature.
It's not literature, but do you aspire to do literature, or do you want to keep doing what you have been doing?
I want to keep doing what I've been doing. I love problem solving, and I like thrillers in the sense of like, oh, you know, basically my general ideology is when you're sitting there, and let's say if a lot of you, I do, if you read before you go to sleep at night, right? So you're laying in bed and you'll read a few chapters or something. You have a book or on your ebook or whatever. And at some point you're getting more and more tired, and you reach a point where you're like, okay, here's where I'm going to put the book down for the evening, right? You're like, okay, I've now reached a level of fatigue where I'm going to put the book down. Well, it's not just the level of fatigue, it's the level of disinterest as well, right? So you reach a point where you're like, okay, now you're starting to talk about what this mountain range looks like, and I'm kind of tired. I'll pick up on this later. Okay, that point, the point at which you put the book down to go to bed at night, why is that there? Why is that in the book? Don't let them put the book down.
Right.
Don't keep those bastards up all night.
Right.
And so.
And that's how it worked with The Martian.
That
People
was the
started
goal,
to read it and
basically.
could not stop. So it was a great
I don't
story.
ever want you to be able to put the book down.
and-
That's the goal.
You know, the first novel, iconically, was Robinson Crusoe, which is what this was. So
Definitely,
so
this is Robinson.
You might say it's
Also,
not
no
literature, but it's a great story.
Well, thanks. But also, no one would accuse it of being particularly original. It's about a guy who's stranded somewhere. It is literally the oldest book.
Exactly. The original story. We skipped over one part of your publishing narrative, and maybe this is just of interest to those of us who are, want to publish a book once in a while. So you had it on the web, and then it became an Amazon Kindle, and then somewhere along the line, here comes Ridley Scott. So tell us that.
Yeah, Ridley just showed up at my door, had flowers. No. So basically, I'd been posting it a chapter at a time to my website, and my website is, right. So I finished it, and I thought like, okay, off to other projects. And I started to get emails from people saying like, hey, Andy, I love your book, but I hate reading it on your website. And that's fair, because my website is totally ghetto. It's just like, blue links left justified on a white background with like no images. It's just absolutely raw data. And nobody likes reading, nobody really likes reading things in a web browser. You know, if you're going to read a whole book, you don't want to do it that way. So I got email from people saying, hey, can you just put it into an e-reader format so I can download it and put it on my e-reader? And so I figured out how to do that. It's pretty easy. And
Free. It's free.
it's still free, yeah. There's also even the conversion to e-reader for me was free. I went online and found a tool and did that. And so I'm like, okay, here you go. There's an e-reader version. Knock yourself out. And then I got email from other people saying like, hey, Andy, love your book, hate your site. But I'm not very technically savvy, and I see you have an e-reader version, but I don't know how to download a thing from the internet and put it on my e-reader. And that's fair, because a lot of people don't know how to, it's called side loading, and a lot of people don't know how to do that. And they'd say, so can you just put it up on Amazon so I can get it through their system, because I know how to do that. And so I figured out how to do that. It turns out it's pretty simple. It's called Kindle Direct Publishing, and you post it there. And but one thing I discovered, they won't let you give it away for free. Amazon actually loses money on every Kindle they sell. They actually sell them at a production loss because they know that you'll buy books.
But the secret is volume somehow.
Yeah, the secret is volume. Yeah. I'll sell you a $20 bill for $10, but I make it up in we're right?
Yeah.
No, well, the secret. Wow, one person liked that joke.
We're totally amused with
resonating.
Ourselves up here.
Yeah.
Y'all can join us.
We kill us. But anyway, so the way they make their money is by selling books, ebooks, right? And so they don't allow people to give away books for free on their service. You must charge at least 99 cents. So I set the price to 99 cents, meaning I was going to pull down a cool 30 cents profit for myself per copy, I'll have you know. And then I posted it, and then nothing happens for like 2 days. They hang on to it, and they don't make it public until they have an actual human skim through it just to make sure it's not a bunch of goat porn or something.
Is there such a thing
don't
as that?
judge.
Okay.
Don't judge.
The things you learn. I don't know.
But I guess they just want it properly categorized if it's goat porn. I don't know. Anyway, after 48 hours, they post it up there and it's live. And then I said, all right, folks, you can either read the book for free on my website or download the e-reader version for free from my website, or you can pay Amazon $1 to put it on your Kindle for you. And more people bought it than downloaded it for free, which shows just the amazing reach that Amazon has into the readership market, and also shows that people are willing to pay $1 to avoid like technical hassles.
Right.
So that was cool, and I was like, oh, that's nice. And then it was selling pretty well, or it seemed to me like it was selling pretty well.
Like, I'm just curious, like 30 copies, 300 copies, 3,000 copies?
It was selling between 300 and 500 copies a day. But bear in mind, the price point is 99 cents, right? It's
okay.
like, and so I thought, well, this seems nice, but I have nothing to compare it to. I know nothing about this stuff. I don't know what the ebook world is like. Well, when you join KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, you're automatically made a member of this forum for all the other self-published authors. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go and look at that forum and see what they're saying. And they had threads where they'd be like, oh, post your sales numbers. Someone's like, oh man, today was awesome. I sold 5 copies.
5 copies, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I guess mine's selling abnormally well. That's good to know. And then it made it to the top of the science fiction list and into the top 20 of all Kindle. And so then I'm like, okay, this is really selling well. And around that time in New York, an editor at Crown Publishing, which is part of Random House, a friend of his said, or he was talking to a literary agent named David Fugate, and this is Julian Pavia is the editor's name, and he was like, oh, I've been told that I should read this book, that it might be good, and it's selling really well, so it might be something we want to consider putting into print, but I don't know. I'm also told it's just kind of a lot of engineering porn, so I'm not sure if it's, got a mainstream appeal. I don't know. And so the agent said, well, I could read it and let you know what I think. And he's like, sure, go ahead. So the agent read it, and then he came to me and said, hey, do you want an agent? And I'm like, sure. And then he turned around to Random House and said, how much are you going to pay us for this book?
Right.
So that was awesome. And so what was funny is after like 3 years, earlier in life, I tried to get an agent, you know, wallpapering my house with rejection letters and just no interest. And then one comes knocking at my door. So it was this complete change of everything.
And just to speed up a little bit here,
Wow.
It's fascinating, but it's like.
See, I guess I
welcome to
do need an
publishing
editor.
today. No,
I do need an
hear
editor.
about Mars at some point, but no, it's an incredible story, and then it takes off, and then, you know, it becomes a movie, and the movie is a blockbuster. So, I mean, did anything?
I assume that's how it goes with everybody's first book.
Yeah, exactly. That's the norm.
I'm assuming this is how all my books will go.
Yeah.
from here.
Yes. Well, actually, I do wonder if you feel under pressure to.
Yes.
I mean, okay. So the next one's about the moon.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. The next book takes place on the moon in the 2080s, 2090s time frame, and there's a city on the moon, and the main character is a woman who's a kind of a low-level criminal. I'm going for the lovable rogue archetype. It's not. She doesn't. You know. It's one of those things where people will get behind a main character who's a criminal as long as that main character isn't hurting people.
Right.
For the most part, if they're just like a thief or kind of thing.
Does she have a kind of Mark Watney style of humor and?
Sort of. She's a lot more selfish.
Okay.
and most of her problems are self-inflicted. But she's extremely intelligent and does a lot of the problem solving.
She can fix things.
Oh yeah.
So this is more STEM education promotion. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, not to, well, I mean that was one of the marvels of The Martian.
Thank you. It certainly wasn't intentional.
Now, is there anything remotely not political, but I mean, you know, here in D.C. there's a lot of talk, as you know, about
politics.
There's politics. Yeah, it happens
Okay.
here. It's been known to crop up here and there. So there's a lot of talk about, you know, should we go back to the moon? Should we go directly to Mars? Is the moon a stepping stone, or is it you know, been there, done that? And you know about, you know, Constellation was canceled. Obama canceled Constellation, and so I'm just wondering,
When did this happen?
do you have any, you know, opinion about should we go back to the moon, and is that something we do before we go to Mars?
Well, you know, I don't know how well this opinion goes over at the Humans to Mars Summit, but I do think we should go back to the moon because I think the moon is an ideal proving ground for technology that we will use.
They're crazy for this idea.
Little bit of support there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of basically, you know, extraterrestrial habitats and stuff. The best way to test them is on the moon, and the moon is this extremely convenient object. It's just like right next door, I mean, compared to Mars.
Right.
And it has, the best thing about the moon is it has permanent abort capabilities. Like, no matter what, if your return vehicle works, you're 4 days away from Earth.
Yep.
And so that is not the case with Mars.
Mars is harder.
Mars is further away, and you know, whatever architecture you use, almost every architecture you use, you know, you're going to have launch windows, and if you're not in those launch windows, it sucks to be you, and you have to wait until you.
So NASA, I believe, is really pushing this proving ground idea for the 2020s, although they're not talking about the surface
They want to
of
do
the moon.
asteroid.
They're talking about, you know, cislunar space and you know, long duration missions, maybe, you know, 6 to 8 months, but not all the way to Mars. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so. In my book, the Ares program is like, I made it because I shamelessly wanted to evoke the feelings of the Apollo era in the reader, right? But realistically, I think the first manned mission to Mars won't look anything like that. I think it'll be a large international effort. I think it'll be more structurally similar to the International Space Station than to an Apollo program. I think private industry will be heavily involved. It's all the stuff that we've been talking about at this. Yeah.
So actually, we'll speak to that some more. In the book, it's all NASA, right?
Yeah.
It's all. And was that a strategic decision, or just you went down that path?
Two reasons. One, as I said, shamelessly evoking the Apollo era feelings, because most of the people, even people who were born after the Apollo era, still think of it as being really awesome. You know, there's this feeling of just like one of the greatest achievements in human history, and so just kind of piggybacking on that feeling by making the Ares mission profile very similar, stylistically very similar to how Apollo works. It's an entirely NASA show, entirely government funded. There's like mission control and stuff like that. That's one thing. Second thing is there's already in the public knowledge a full understanding of how that works.
Right.
I didn't need to explain like some complicated international agency and I didn't need to make that stuff up. And third off, it just simplifies it. Because I really wanted to concentrate on Mark's problems on Mars, not go into a dissertation of the, you know, complex international inner workings of a Mars mission.
So you're saying that your vision in real life would probably be an international collaboration would it be a public-private partnership with someone like SpaceX? Because they're talking very much about going in the 2020s with humans to the surface. So
so all I can do is offer like my opinions, and I always preface this by saying like, despite most of the people that are up on this stage during this summit, I am not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. Okay. So I mean, I have my opinions, but they're not backed up by anything. But my opinion is that the best way to get to Mars is to heavily encourage commercial spaceflight now.
Right.
Because they will drive down the cost to low Earth orbit far better than any government agency could. And so companies like SpaceX, Boeing, et cetera, they'll drive the price down through competition, and the cheaper it gets to put things in low Earth orbit, the cheaper it gets to do a manned Mars mission. And once that reaches some critical point where it's like, oh, wow, now a Mars mission won't cost $100 billion, now it'll cost like $20 billion. It's like, because it got so much cheaper to put stuff in orbit, then it's like, huh, okay, now this becomes realistic. And I know there's been much said, I'm pointing at the screen because I saw this on the screen like, 14 hours ago, but the Planetary Society did their analysis of how we could do a manned mission to Mars without adjusting NASA's budget. But no matter what, if you make a manned mission to Mars cheaper, I guarantee you it becomes more likely to happen.
So do you think that the cost is the heavy lift on this?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's my opinion, is that the cost is getting stuff from low Earth orbit, getting stuff from the ground to LEO. Imagine there was a magical gate, just like a big opening, and you could just push something through it and it would magically appear in orbit, and it costs you nothing to do that. We'd be on Mars within 5 years.
Do you think that the public needs to be more bought into the idea of going to Mars than it is currently? Books like The Martian and the movie obviously promote this in a huge way. And so NASA had 18,000 applications for the next team of astronauts. And I think they have 8 to 14 openings. They have 18,000 applications they're going through. So a lot of people are enthusiasts, but I'm also guessing, and I don't know this for a fact, that a lot of people out there are not really following it closely and do not know why we would need to go to Mars. I mean, do you feel that there needs to be a greater kind of sort of public relations effort to persuade the public that this is a good idea?
I don't know, because I don't really claim to know anything about PR or that aspect of the space stuff. I'm far more interested in the technology and stuff. I have accidentally helped that machine, for which I'm happy. I'm glad.
Right.
I'm glad that I was able to help in any way. Right. That certainly wasn't my intent when writing the book. I just wanted to write an adventure story. I think it's particularly hard during a recession to convince people that we need to be expending resources on things that don't directly address the problems they have. But that's always going to be the case with any funding. And I think, everyone agrees that 95% of the government is a waste of effort, but nobody agrees on which 5% they should keep, right?
Right. So why should we go to Mars?
Well, so my two answers to that, right? I'll start with my My simpler one, which you've all heard 1,000 times probably from a bunch of different people, is that I really do believe we need to have humans on 2 different planets. We need to have a stable human population somewhere other than Earth, such that in the event of some sort of cataclysm, our species doesn't go extinct. And while it's an extremely low chance that that would happen, it is still non-zero. And
So an insurance policy.
yeah, well, 25 years as a computer programmer has taught me the importance of backing up my data.
Right. Let's back up it.
So that is the kind of, that's one explanation, one argument in favor of it. And so people say, why send humans to Mars? You could send robots if you want science, and et cetera. I completely agree. If your objective is to learn scientific information about Mars, there is no reason to send humans. And I know a lot of people will go like, but wait, astronauts can do so much more than a rover. That's true, but for the amount of money it costs you to send astronauts, you could develop better rovers. So the reason to send humans to Mars is to figure out how to send humans to Mars for an eventual goal of colonization. That's the answer.
So the goal is colonization, a permanent, so not just a McMurdo-type station like they have in Antarctica, something beyond that.
McMurdo's primary import is government grants. You need to have a stable, self-sustaining economy for that to work. So the second argument that I make is a little less exciting and a little more just like nitty-gritty, which is that putting money into a manned Mars mission, or actually just putting money into space at all, enables the commercial space flight sector. So the primary customer for people like SpaceX and now Roscosmos, now that they're privatized, and so on, are going to be governments for quite a while. I know SpaceX gets companies, and they do satellite launches and stuff like that, but the things they're working on that we're all interested in, their customer are governments. So by working on manned missions to Mars, we are feeding the commercial spaceflight sector. And once that gets to some critical point where they can actually start making money on their own, then we're going to have a genuine space industry, and it's going to be like a space boom. Now, this is not an untested theory. This is exactly what the US government did for the airline industry back when it was starting out. It said like, oh, wow, in order for airlines to work, they need airports, which means they need huge chunks of cities, extremely valuable real estate. Well, we're gonna give that to them. We're gonna make that happen. And then it created the airline industry, which has been somewhat profitable over the last century, I'd say. And so you could do the same thing. So although it's much more boring and it's much more actuarial, my argument is all the money that the government puts into the space program now, they will make back many multiples of that in the taxes they reap from a successful commercial space
I will just say, I was just flashing on the thought of the TSA lines to get to a flight to Mars would just be terrible. Hours and hours. We're going to go to questions, I think, in a minute. Is that right? We're going to do questions? I've no idea what our timing is here, but before we do, I mean, do you envision terraforming Mars? I mean, like if we saved the human species but left all the whales behind and the flowers and the trees and everything, I mean, it's not a total win if that's all that is up there.
I think we could leave the Anopheles mosquito behind. I'd be comfortable with that.
Leave the mosquitoes.
But well, first off, if we had a self-sustaining human population on Mars, there would be no way to do that without bringing other life forms with us. Now, we might not bring, bison or whales, but we would bring a subset of the biosphere necessary to maintain Earth life. As far as terraforming, I'm much more of a near future guy. I'm much more of a nitty-gritty, okay, show me how to do this. Terraforming Mars, I'm like, okay, if you can show me a way to ship like 10 to the 20th joules of energy to Mars every year for the next 50 years, then sure, we can talk about it. But ultimately, it's just this enormous expenditures of energy well beyond our technology to provide.
One last thing. Are you comfortable sort of being an oracle about space travel? I mean, you wrote this book, and exactly. I mean, do you feel like this is kind of an unofficial job you have now?
I never really thought about it that way. I'm always happy to bombastically state my opinion, and so that I'm happy with. But like I said earlier, I don't consider myself any sort of authority. I'm just a fan.
Nonetheless, we're going to get questions from the crowd. They're going to ask you about how many metric tons need to go to the surface of Mars.
Big group of people, most of whom are more qualified than me to be answering these questions.
Gentlemen, right here.
Jim Head, Brown University. Andy, if you were guaranteed a safe return on a trip to Mars, where would you go and what would you do?
I would go home because I have no interest in leaving this planet. I write about brave people. I'm not one of them. I do not want to go into space. I would never go to Mars. But if I were, for instance, talking about, but to answer your question in a non-weasel out of it kind of way, if I were deciding where a manned mission to Mars would go with some brave person who's not me as the astronaut, I would want to check out places that are ideal for ISRU, for in situ resource utilization. So looks like
Everyone here knows what that acronym means.
yeah, that's true.
It's
Yeah.
right.
Usually I have to explain what that is. But so I guess I'd be going for, since we know there seems to be abundant water pretty much uniformly through the Martian soil, becomes a non-issue. I would be more interested in places where there is easy access to minerals that can be smelted into metal for long-term colonization.
Okay. Questions? Raise your hand. Right here in front.
Hi. My question is, when you were writing the book, was Mark Watney originally a botanist, or was he a different kind of scientist when he started out?
The question is, was Watney a botanist right at the moment that I started to write the book, or did I change that? No, I had it in mind for him to be a botanist right from day one, because that was him growing the plants to solve that problem of lasting a long time was the core plot line that I built the book around. And so that was like the first idea part of it. So I always had it in mind for him to be a botanist. And since then, I've been corrected by many experts in the field that really botanists don't do that. Horticulturalists do the growing, or agriculturalists, or stuff like that. Botanists actually study the cell biology and stuff.
But do nerdy people come up to you and quibble about little tiny technical things in the book?
Have you met these people?
Yeah. Yes.
Of course they do. But I love it. I love it because I'm one of those people.
Right.
I'm one of those people who bitches about inconsistencies in Star Trek, So I certainly can't complain about it. And also I brought this on myself by telling everybody, hey, I'm making a book that's, scientifically accurate.
Right.
And they're like, really?
Yeah, right.
All right. I just that. So if these same people, they won't complain about scientific inaccuracies in Star Wars, right? It's like nobody complains about, well, okay, I've got this lever I push and it turns on the hyperdrive and off I go. Everyone's like, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, the Kessel run under 12 parsecs. Well, parsec's a unit of distance. They'll complain about that.
But you set yourself up.
Yeah, I set myself up.
Yeah.
I stepped into that lion's den and I reap what I sow. But I have no problem with that. And I like it because, among other things, it gets me, while I was writing the book, initially and posting it to my website, I got a lot of feedback from my readers who are hardcore dorks, and they would correct me on math and science errors. So.
Is there anything that you really wish you had done differently from a technical standpoint? And we've talked about the windstorm, but I think everyone understands that was necessary for the plot. But
yeah, but that also is kind of my biggest regret in that, I did make the conscious decision to just be physics inaccurate on the sandstorm.
Right.
But
the beginning of the book, as you know, there's a big storm.
Yeah, at the beginning of the story, there's a huge sandstorm, and it threatens to knock over their ship, and they have to abort. In reality, of course, Mars's atmosphere is so thin that a windstorm would have a difficult time blowing over a piece of paper, let alone a 27-ton spacecraft. So it was like a non-issue. And that's just this blatant violation of reality. And I wish I had done something that was consistent with real physics. At the time I wrote it, I had a different idea on how it could all start. It was going to be they were doing an MAV engine test. Something goes wrong. There's an explosion, which leads to all the problems. But it's a man versus nature story, and I really wanted nature to get the first punch in.
Right.
I have since learned, and I didn't know this at the time, I've since learned that Mars has lightning, and I didn't know that.
Mars has lightning.
Mars has lightning. So it could have been a lightning strike that like hit like a spare fuel tank or something. Or I don't know. It's not like there's a lot of oxygen in Mars' atmosphere for that fuel tank to blow up with, but I could have come up with something.
It's interesting that Ridley Scott and his team decided to go with it, even though they also knew this.
Yeah, well, that was funny because I got I got messages from Ridley. He's like, yeah, we're doing the math on this, and there's just no way a sandstorm on Mars would do it. I'm like, I know. I'm like, well, I mean, I said, like, well, I had this other idea where it would be like an MAV engine test, and they're like, oh, no, we've already got the CGI guys working on the sandstorm.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, we want to describe it in a way that is not physically inaccurate. And I'm like, okay, sandstorms on Mars don't get that strong. I don't know what you want me to do. This was just a complete concession to reality on my part. And so what we compromised, and in the film, they don't describe the velocity of the sandstorm, they describe the force. They say, oh, it's got a force of like 8,500 newtons. Mm-hmm. And that would be enough to knock over the spacecraft. And it's like, okay, so if you go do the math on what the velocity of the wind on Mars would have to be to give you 8,500 newtons. It's something like, 700,000 meters per second or something that could never happen.
Right.
But what was stated in the film was actually physically accurate.
Exactly. Okay. All right. Good. Good to know. All right. So another question. Someone raise your hand, please.
There's someone back there.
Okay, in the back. This one back
I
there?
think the guy who just gave up, that's who we're calling on. Yeah.
Okay, how about this right here? Thank you.
Big fan. So question, considering the politics involving NASA-China cooperation currently, what was your motivation for having the Chinese sort of be these helpful protagonists that come in?
Well, I certainly didn't have any political axe to grind or anything like that. It just seemed like I wanted it to... So Mark was desperate and using all of his resources in every way he possibly could. I wanted Earth to have the same problem. I didn't want that. I wanted it to seem like they were doing, they were on their very last option as well. I wanted everything to be as desperate as possible. And so NASA was like, okay, well, we have this one booster that can get to Mars, and it was for a Saturn probe. And they say, like, we're compromised, we're taking this booster to put these places, and then it fails. And then, so I wanted to make it so that it was like the entire world used all of their resources that were available that they could bring to bear in that time to save Watney. As for China, I mean, if I'd written the story like 20 years ago, it would have been Russia, It's just they're there. I see China as the an ascending space power, and I was not grinding any political axe on that. I do believe we should be cooperating with China in space travel, but that was not like a moral that I was trying to make in the story. In fact, it didn't even come up. In the story, it didn't even come up, wait, it's against the law for us to share technology. No, I didn't even mention it.
Let's have the microphone down here if we could. And while we're waiting, do you think that a geopolitical contest with China actually would be good for getting us to Mars, or is cooperation the better route?
I really don't think that would help. I mean, yes, the Cold War got us to the moon, but it got 12 people to the moon 50 years ago, and nothing since. If you really want to get large numbers of people, if you really want to make this a thing, a part of humanity, then you can't do it without an economic reason. It can't just be like government funded. There needs to be people need to have some economic reason to do it. And so a space race with China would just be, it could make a really cool short-term benefit, but in the long term, what we really need is the economics to support it.
Thanks. I'm Josh Shaman with Nexus Media. And my question relates to the accuracy discussion, because it was extremely accurate when we were reading your book. You can tell from the very beginning, ignoring the sandstorm stuff, which I didn't even know about until later, just throughout, there's a tremendous amount of information. You feel like you're learning something, and yet it's an exciting story. Did you get pushback from the publishers or also the film producers for having that kind of accuracy, thinking that the public wouldn't gravitate to it? Because my experience is the public's demanding more of that now, but the sort of the status quo has been to avoid it.
No, I didn't get anything like that. Everybody, at every step of the way, people zeroed in on that as something unique in the story that makes it more saleable. So the publishers loved it. In fact, the publishers wanted me, during the editing process, the editor was like, ooh, this is cool, explain this part of it in more detail, expand on this, expand on that. And of course, the film, they put a huge amount of effort into accuracy. They had NASA and JPL advisors, and they were on the phone with me all the time as well. Not that I measure up to those guys, but you know, it's my story, so I know a lot about it. And yeah, so I would say no, there was like zero pushback on scientific accuracy. They all loved it.
Question over here.
Oh, cool, thanks. Oh, Mike? Oh, okay.
Oh, there.
So just Chelsea Cook from Virginia. So just a quick question. I've heard in one of your interviews that one of your influential authors was Robert Heinlein. I read him too. I love him, so I could definitely see that in the book, and I really love the style and the way that just everything about it. But you are by training, I guess, a computer programmer, and so I guess what advice would you have for people in sort of the Mars generation who really want to combine both their love of science and their love of writing to write science fiction? Because mostly these days, unless you're in college or in a good environment, still in the public schools, it's kind of, oh, well, you're good at science or you're good at writing, you're not good at both. But I really feel like to be a full person, you have to have those opposing sides that might not be as opposing as we think them to be.
Well, I don't know exactly how to answer that because I would never claim to be any sort of expert on education. But I guess, what'd you say?
Just as a writer, I guess, then.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it's just figure out what the kids like to do and encourage it. I mean, I liked science and I liked writing, so I ended up being a science fiction writer.
So just, I think one thing that would be good advice for people, though, is to what extent do you grind away with the writing versus, you know, become an expert or do the research so that you have something to say? I mean, like, how do you balance those two?
Yeah.
Or do you do both in equal measures?
Yeah, again, I'm sorry, I just don't, I mean, that's a huge topic, right? How to properly, educate kids so that they can make the most of their potential. I mean, that's the entire, large groups of people dedicate their lives to answering that question.
Well, what's your writing method? I mean, do you get up in the morning and just start writing, or do you do a bunch of research and then do some writing?
Well, I love doing research. I love doing the math. I love doing the research and figuring out all the little fiddly details. And I'll go way down the rabbit hole on that. And so I'll end up I'll spend, a week working on something, even though I'm like, yes, at this point, I'm way beyond like anything that could possibly affect the story. Right. But by God, I need to know this. I posted to my Facebook the other day this massively complex integral that I was like, at this point, I gave up on trying to integrate this. And it all had to do with like light moving around in different refracting mediums. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of like one of those things where you go online to find out, what's the capital of Colombia, and the next thing you know, 4 hours later, you're at a Wikipedia page on like giraffe meeting calls, and you're like, I don't know how I got from here to there, but
All right, another question. There's one, yeah, right here.
Hi, Andy. Two questions. How many books after the movie are sold? Number two is that you were showing on your Facebook this invitation to the White House for the Congress.
Okay, yeah, two things. So first off, I don't know how many books sold before the movie and how many sold after. There was a huge spike in sales for the movie and so on. Right now, it's sitting at about 3 million sales in the U.S. And
that's typical for most writers. Yes, that's typical.
And then it's also been translated into 45 languages or so, and I don't know how those sales are going, but I assume they sold a copy or two there. And then I was not invited to the White House. I'm going to speak at Congress. I'm going to speak to the House Subcommittee on Space.
When is that?
Later today.
Later today?
Yeah. That's why I'm wearing my fineries, although not my nice pants or shoes.
Will they let you into
compromised a
Congress
bit.
with those shoes?
What's that?
Will they let you into Congress with those shoes?
I don't know. I'm not going to be wearing it. I'm going to be wearing formal shoes.
Okay.
It's just they're very uncomfortable. So
You're right.
For you folks, you get the half formal, I guess, semi-formal.
Well, what are you going to say to Congress?
I have a prepared statement that I'm going to read into the. I've got 5 minutes to speak, and then the congressmen and congresswomen can ask me. They may choose to ask me questions.
But give us some sense of what the topic is. I mean,
well, the topic of the hearing is deep space habitat. So both habitat for like astronauts in zero G, like space stations, and also permanent, like habitats on Mars, like HABs, or on the moon, or whatever. And like, what should we be working on? And my big thing, another thing that I don't know may or may not be popular with the crowd is I really think we should be working on artificial gravity, which is spinning a space station.
So on the way there, right?
Yep. Well, yeah, or just
it has to be
general.
pretty big, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, but it doesn't have to be an Arthur C. Clarke wheel in space thing. It can literally be a crew compartment, a long cable, and a counterweight, and then that spins. And then the counterweight, by the way, is not just dead weight. It's like the other half of the space station and all the functional things.
What's the diameter?
Okay, so I learned by talking to Stan Love.
Yeah.
So technically the diameter, if you just want 1 g of force, if you have a smaller diameter, you just need to spin faster.
Right.
But the big problem are the tidal forces. So if you're in a room that's being spun around, the force on your feet is going to be more than the force on your head because the force on your head is closer to the center of the rotation. And if that deviance is too much, people get severe vertigo.
Right.
NASA did tests on this stuff in the 60s. And according to Stan Love, an astronaut, one of the guys who actually helped assemble ISS, he said that humans are fine if it's about 2 RPM or less. Right. So if your centrifuge is big enough that you can get 1 G and by only having to spin around once per 30 seconds. Right. So from there you can do the math, and it means you need about a 227 meter radius.
227 meters. Okay.
Yeah, radius.
Radius. Okay.
So that's about 450 meters diameter.
Right.
So 450 meters of cable.
Right. But then you have to decelerate it, don't you? Unspin it when you arrive.
Well, first off, no. Because you like spinning it up, once you get it spinning, it'll just keep spinning, right? It's just rotational inertia. You don't need to expend fuel to continue. And then second off, once you arrive, unless you're aerobraking,
right,
you don't need to spin down. Okay. But even then, spinning down is just a matter of applying a little bit of force. And that 450 meter cable. I did the math on it. If you assume that it was just steel cable and you have a reasonable margin of error and yield strength and all that, if your space station weighed the same as ISS, which is it's the only big-ass space station I had to work with, so I'm like, okay, if it weighed the same as ISS and half of it was on one side and half of it was on the other, your cable would need to be, I forget the actual diameter, but the cable itself would weigh about 10,000 kilograms. Mm-hmm. Compared to ISS's 400,000 kilograms. So 1 part in 40 for the centripetal gravity benefits doesn't seem like too much to pay. Of course, every aspect of this replacement of this new space station would have to be designed to handle the force of gravity.
But you
there,
you think the benefits to the physiology
the reason it's important to me is because we spend so much time, effort, money, and resources ameliorating the long-term effects of zero-G when I feel like we could just eliminate them entirely with gravity. And astronauts can have a very diligent exercise regimen to take care of the muscle and bone, or not even take care of, but reduce the muscle and bone density loss that they get from that. But we haven't found anything that deals with the macular degeneration of the eyes. And if you imagine, I mean, when you see astronauts returning from ISS, they have to be carried out of the capsule and put in chairs and basically hauled away. They can't even stand anymore. Now, can you imagine astronauts after 7 or 8 months transfer to Mars, and they land on Mars, and it's still only like, under half a G, but it's still it's still gravity. How functional do you think they'll be? Well, let's say we send them to Mars in 1 Mars gravity worth of artificial gravity. Now they've spent, not only will they be fully functional when they arrive at Mars, they will be completely used to operating in 1 Mars gravity.
Right. Because when they get there, we're going to demand go outside right now and walk around.
Well, the alternative is they get there and they spend the first week recovering. And it's not a matter of like the impatience of the public. It's a matter of like, you spend a lot of money to put astronauts on Mars. You don't want to piss away a week.
Right. Another question. Where do we? How about right here, this gentleman?
Andy.
Wait for the microphone, please.
In my family, there's 3 women. My wife is an MD, the oldest daughter is an MBA, and the youngest is BA and eventually going to film school. They all say, why are we wasting money on space? They hate science fiction. Grudgingly, I took them to see The Martian after agreeing to pay all their expenses and a nice dinner. They came out of the theater loving the movie and praising you.
Oh, well, thank you.
But in our household, we're quite familiar with Elon Musk, and the big question was, where was SpaceX in the book and in the movie? I mean, it was all NASA. There was no private space companies involved at all.
So basically I was, as I said, shamelessly evoking the feel of the Apollo program. I don't believe that that's how the real thing would work. Also, although SpaceX is now just a common household name and everybody knows who they are, at the time I wrote the book in 2009, they really weren't that well known. And so I hadn't, even the one mention of any sort of private or whatever contracted space thing is ULA. It's the only one I mentioned in the book.
Another question. I think we have one here and one there. How about right here?
Ken Brandt from the Robinson Planetarium in North Carolina. It's not a question, it's just a comment. Andy, thank you. Even though you didn't really set out to change the path of Mars exploration, I think you have. Thanks.
Thanks.
Right. That's a good comment. How about Chris over here as a question?
Kind of related to the comment there and one of the earlier questions, and it's great that you were invited to go to the Hill for the hearing later today. Thank you for coming with us to the Hill tomorrow. And so in light of the discussion we had yesterday with Hollywood and Mars and all the movies and projects out there, as well as an awful lot of well-known space enthusiasts in the entertainment community, what do you think the role should be from the entertainment community in helping to influence space policy particularly?
Well, I think it's kind of dangerous to assume that the entertainment industry will take some sort of role or onus or responsibility. They're in it to make money. That's what they do. So as long as they can keep making big, huge piles of money off of stories about space, they'll continue to do so. So really, they are less of a, how do I put it? They are less of an agency responsible for this stuff than they are a tool by which we can try to help maintain public interest in the space program.
Let me ask a sort of a follow-up, a sort of more skeptical follow-up to that. Do you think that Hollywood has romanticized space to a degree, and I mean,
Of course.
it's a tough question.
Yeah, no, it's not a tough question. It has a definitive answer. Yes, they have. They have absolutely. I mean, because they romanticize everything.
Right.
They want to make things exciting. They want to make things more. Movies are more interesting than real life. They have to be. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Their job is to entertain. My job is to entertain. I don't consider myself any sort of like, I don't know, like I'm not out to change the world. I just want you to enjoy reading my books.
Right.
That's it.
Okay. Then we have time for a couple more questions. We have 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
I can't really see who wants. Another question up here in front.
Jim Head, Brown University. Andy, I just want to compliment you on your descriptions of the surface of Mars. For somebody who spends most of their waking hours in an office in Providence, Rhode Island, visualizing Mars through technology, your descriptions were just stunning. And thank you for sharing that with the rest of the world.
Oh, well, thank you.
So, have you done a lot of research on the moon, I assume, for this next book?
Yep.
And when's it going to be done, the book?
It'll probably be out on shelves and stuff in mid-2017. My first draft is contractually due in January, so
you're
I better get it done by
You're
then.
writing it right now.
Yeah, I'm about a third of the way through the first draft.
Third of the way through.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, have you been under pressure from publishers to like come out with a sequel to The Martian of some kind?
Actually, it's really more the studios that keep poking me on that.
Okay.
Like Fox is like, hey, what do you got? I'm like, I got nothing. He got home.
Would you? Yeah, but would you launch Mark Watney again?
I just don't see any plausible sequel. Believe me, I would love to. I would love to write a sequel, but I just don't see anything that doesn't suck. So the main problem is like Mark going back in space again, really unlikely for him to go to space at all. Him getting in trouble again in space really strains credibility. Like what are the odds that one astronaut ends up in deep shit, like in 2 different missions? I mean,
could you bring him back into your moon book as a second character?
I vaguely thought about that as well, but Mark as a secondary character would be very frustrating to the reader. Seriously, like if he's in the book, the reader's going to want him to be the main character. And so I had considered like, okay, well, one guy getting in trouble in space twice is very unlikely, but it is certainly possible to have another space disaster or near disaster in the works, and then he's one of the guys on the ground helping out. But again, that makes him less of a main character.
And after the moon book, would you do another book set in space, a sort of a hard science fiction book?
Sure.
Or at some point, will you produce a slim volume of melancholic short stories or something, poems?
Probably a slim volume of short stories someday. I love short stories. Like when I was growing up, that was my favorite medium to read. I loved just these compilations and anthologies. And I told my publishers, I was like, hey, The Martian did well. How about I write a book of short stories? And they're like, those don't sell great. We'd really rather you just wrote a book.
A book.
But yeah, I mean, I will eventually release a short story collection someday.
Great. Well, I tell you what, I think we're about done. So, okay, so one last question in the back, right here.
No pressure.
I don't know if this is too far out there, but of course there's been all this stuff in the media about breakthrough starshot and all these things. Do you see any potential interplay between the technology that would enable something like that and what we would need to get to Mars, or are they just kind of unrelated? Like we're gonna send all these little tiny things way out into deep space and Mars is a different box?
Well, the main thing for that is the idea of laser propulsion, as I understand it. And so that, if that could, laser propulsion and also solar wind propulsion, if that can be feasible, then that could be useful. Yeah. The problem is getting the energy off of Earth, because if you try to propel something in space with lasers launched from Earth, they're going to attenuate like crazy through the atmosphere. We're getting cross.
Someone's mumbling at us. Okay. So listen, well, thank you very much, Andy. Great job.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And thank you, Joel.
And, a couple of closing notes, actually sort of a last question for Andy. In my introduction, there was this website that said that this Martian book, soon to be made a major motion picture. From what you said, that turned out pretty well.
It went all right, yeah.
Okay, and for those of you who live locally, you can see why we invited Joel to be the interviewer this afternoon. So again, let's thank both gentlemen again.
Thank you very much. All right.